Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime episode. I am so happy that you are here. I am so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing Matthew Heikkila, the 20-year-old man who murdered his adoptive parents with bullets that were labeled Mom and Dad. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. All right, let's go ahead and get into this video. Now, this video is on a case that I learned about a long time ago by actually watching a YouTube video from a friend of mine who covered it quite some time ago. I don't know if she'd want me to mention her, so I'm just not going to say, but if I get the permission, I'll put it in the description box. But either way, a long time ago, I saw her do a video on this case, and I was like, ooh, I want to look into that further. Like, I wanted more information, so I dove headfirst into newspapers.com, which is an excellent resource for looking into cases, unless they're like really new or really old, that it gets a little bit complicated. But stuff right in the middle, like this case, you can find so much information. And let me tell you, I read so many things. In this case, the information on this case is now burned into my brain, and it is horrific. So today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things so that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day, okay? I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details. But of course, I want you to answer what's yes and then go on. But the question of the day is this. Well, it's kind of two questions, or it's one with like an extension, okay? Here it is. What do you believe was the motive for Matthew Heikkila to murder his parents? And do you think it had anything to do with adopted child syndrome? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the murders of Dawn and Richard Heikkila at the hands of their own son, Matthew. So our story today is going to begin on Wednesday, January 30th, 1991, and we are beginning with a welfare check. Basically, on this day, Dawn and Richard Heikkila had both not shown up for work when they were supposed to. They both had very successful and prominent careers, with Richard being a medical researcher known for his work in Parkinson's disease, like literally being one of the country's experts. And Dawn was a real estate agent, a top real estate saleswoman, and a member of the State $1 Million Sales Club. So serious jobs with serious responsibilities and schedules to stick to. Now, it was Dawn's work, or rather Dawn's coworkers, who called the police to request the welfare check because Dawn did not show up for an appointment, and that was incredibly unlike her to not show up. So they had called her on her car phone to see where she was because of the 90s of this situation, right? Car phone 90s, we are there. And when they called her car phone, they were surprised to find that it wasn't Dawn who was answering the phone, but Dawn's oldest son, Matthew. On this call, Matthew informed Dawn's coworkers that Dawn and Richard had gone to New Hampshire and that they were seeing, or not, I was going to say visiting, it wasn't really a visit, we'll get there. They were going to New Hampshire to see Matthew's younger brother, Richard, and Dawn's other son, Joshua. And Joshua was in New Hampshire because he was away at school at Dartmouth, or Dartmouth, as I like to call it to irritate my husband. So basically, Matthew M. Heikkila the first, told Dawn's coworkers that the reason they were there is because Joshua had gotten into a bad car accident, and that's why they had left so suddenly without telling anybody what was going on, because it was an emergency. Now, immediately upon hearing this, Dawn's coworkers knew that something wasn't right. They were like, what's that I smell? I smell bullshit, because Matthew was not allowed to drive his mother's car, and they wouldn't even think that she would have allowed him to do this in an emergency. And this was actually like a point of contention in the household because his mother's car was an Audi, and he was pissed off. He was real mad that there was an Audi in the household and he wasn't allowed to drive it. He was just allowed to drive his Jeep or the other junky cars that they owned. Okay. Junky cars. He sounds incredibly spoiled. I'm going to put that out there right now. But he was mad because not only was he not allowed to drive it, but his brother Joshua was, and this pissed him off. But anyways, even though Matt did say it was an emergency, and maybe in some situation, if there was an emergency, they would let him use his car. But The coworker that was talking to him did not believe that this was true. She just got a bad feeling. Her name was Karen, and she decided, like, I don't know. I don't think this is right. So she wanted to check in to Matt's story, which is something that I don't think he anticipated happening. So she reaches out to Joshua at Dartmouth, okay? And she finds that not only has he not been in a bad accident, but he has not been able to get a hold of his parents for days. So once Karen learned this, she started to get very nervous, and that is why she called the police. So they're waiting for the police to arrive. And in the meantime, they're kind of doing their own little investigation, and two of Dawn's coworkers actually drive over to the house to see what they can find out while they're waiting for police to get there too. So they get there and they find that the house is all locked, and on the outside of the door, there is actually a note left for a carpenter that I guess was going to be coming to the house to do some work, with an explanation as to why they weren't going to be able to do the work. And it was the same explanation that Matthew had given Dawn's coworkers over the phone. So they just sit there and they wait for police to get there because the house is locked up. There's not much they can do. Once the police do get there, they kind of look around and they see that there's no sign of forced entry. It doesn't look like from the outside anything bad was going on. But because of the fact that there was a history of disputes at this particular address, which we're going to get into more fully later, but spoiler, one of these disputes was Matthew literally threatening to murder his father, the chief of police informed the people who were on the scene that they should enter the house. And there was an open second-story window, so instead of kicking in the door, they enter through this window. And once they're inside the house, they find the bodies of Dawn and Richard. 46-year-old Dawn was found shot to death in the hallway near her bedroom. She had been shot multiple times, with at least one of those shots being to the back of her head. And her husband, 48-year-old Richard, was found shot to death as well, and he was found at the bottom of a flight of stairs. Now, that's already incredibly brutal, right? Being shot to death in your home is incredibly brutal, but it wasn't even just that, because they were shot with a shotgun, and not just a normal shotgun. It was a sawed-off shotgun, and the shotgun was found at the scene along with spent slugs that made it very clear who was responsible for these murders, because written on the slugs were, quote, mom and, quote, mom and dad. Now, I know that was a lot. This case is a lot, and we're going to get all into that. But first, I want to talk about Dawn and Richard. I want to talk about the family, the background, the dynamics, and then we will get into the murder and the aftermath. So with that, Richard and Dawn. Richard, as I said, was a medical researcher known for his work on Parkinson's disease, who actually won the Javits Neuroscience Award in 1987, which is apparently one of the most prestigious awards granted by the National Institutes of Health. And he also served on the Science Advisory Board on the National Parkinson's Foundation. At the time he was killed, he worked at the Robert Wood Johnson Medical School of the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey, which is quite the mouthful. Dr. Stanley Bergen, who was the president of the University of Medicine and Dentistry, of course, of New Jersey, described him as a, quote, outstanding researcher. After his murder, his colleagues really mourned him, both professionally and personally. Personally, because he was a friend, but professionally because he was instrumental in the work they were doing. And they said that losing him actually put back the quest for curing is the word, Parkinson's, by quite a bit, because he was so important in the steps towards coming up with a cure. I don't know if there would be a cure. I don't know if everything is curable, but definitely treatments. I'm not a doctor. But he kind of was, right? His research helped develop a drug that slowed the spread of the disease in newly diagnosed cases. And his work, quote, gave rise to an innovative look at the possible cause and cure for Parkinson's. So I guess it could have been curable, or it could be curable, though it's not currently cured. And though that's incredibly important, we can't argue that. His career was not all that he had or all that he did. He also worked with a township basketball league where the kids loved him, with one Oak Ridge high school student saying that he was a nice and generous guy. And it did seem like he was a nice guy, because prior to his murder, he had written to a local newspaper about the Persian Gulf War, where he said, quote, wage peace, not war. It takes much more courage. And he, this very nice and generous guy, was married to Dawn. Dawn, as I said, was a real estate agent, a top saleswoman, and a member of the state $1 Million Sales Club. She excelled at her job and was loved by her clients because she was the type of person who was just sweet. She would go above and beyond and not just do her job, but try to make people feel special and important. And she would even bring like little gifts, little toys for her clients' kids. After Dawn's death, people who worked with her at the real estate office were devastated. There was one woman who had learned about what happened to Dawn, and she wasn't even scheduled to be at work after that, but she came in anyway because she just felt like she needed to be close to the people who loved Dawn and to the place that Dawn loved because she loved her work. Prior to her current work as a real estate agent, she had been a math teacher, actually, which sounds like an incredibly difficult job. But she switched over to working at this real estate office in about 1984. It was 1984 from what I read. And she was said to be not just like a coworker, but friends with most of the people she worked with them even coming over to her house for like Christmas parties or like backyard barbecues. But just like her husband, her work wasn't the only thing she had because she was very heavily involved with her community as well. Dawn was very involved with her church. She was elected as an elder in the church and was in charge of a program that worked with like parents and their kids at the church and participated in baptisms and was the superintendent of the Sunday school for years. She was just said to be like a wonderful woman, one of those super polite people who just had like incredible faith. She was said to be sweet and wonderful, but caring and professional. And she was just the type of person who didn't have a mean bone in her body, with her friend Susan saying of her, and I quote, Dawn, her name was so appropriate because she was a ray of sunshine. Even when she was tired, even when she was hurting, she was a ray of sunshine. So they really had it made as a couple. They were a hardworking, dedicated power couple. And the only thing in their life that didn't seem to come easily to them or didn't seem to be able to be attainable, at least in the early years through their hard work and determination, was starting a family. From what I've read, it seems like the couple always wanted to start a family and always wanted to have kids. But for whatever reason, they had trouble conceiving, which is a problem that a lot of people struggle with. And after years of struggling with that, they still wanted a child. They still felt like they had a lot of love to give. And that's how they ended up with their very first love, Matthew. He was born August 7th, 1970, and had spent the first few months of his life with a foster family. But when he was just 6 months old, he was adopted by Dawn and Richard. And then, big Shyamalan twist for them. 9 months later, life had found a way, and they then gave birth, a natural birth, to their second son, and this was Joshua. So they adopt a kid because they think they can't conceive, get him home, and then boom, bang, boom, get pregnant, have another baby. So now they go from no kids to 2 kids in a very short amount of time. So as I'm sure you can imagine, they had their hands full, but they were said to just be naturals, that they were just like very good at being parents, and that the family was very, very close. They did everything together. They played tennis, they skied, they attended church. And these kids, if nothing else, were just incredibly loved. Both of them were incredibly loved, with some articles later saying that Matthew was even maybe too loved. People who knew Dawn and Richard referred to the family as the all-American family, that they were mom and dad America, with them, living in their nice 2-story home in Bernards Township with a fireplace and a back deck and a basketball hoop at the end of the driveway, Prior to living here, they had spent 8 years in Hohokus, which I had never heard of before, but obviously when you hear that name, you have to Google it. It was in New Jersey. It is in New Jersey. Presumably it is still in New Jersey, but now they were here in Bernards Township, but they were settled and they were happy and everything seemed good. But Matthew tells the story of his childhood and his life a little bit differently. He says that throughout his entire life, he never really felt like he belonged anywhere, even in his family home growing up. And he felt like there was favoritism towards Josh because Josh was their biological son. Now, through everything I've read, through everyone's account, and just from things that I read about things that his parents did, it seems like they went above and beyond to love him and to stand up for him and to protect him, even when it wasn't the best thing they could have done for themselves. They still did it because they loved him so much. So this was either him saying that he didn't feel loved or that there was favoritism was either a lie, to explain why he went on to do what he did, or this was just his perception of a situation, even if it may not have actually been the reality of the situation. This is how he felt. Maybe. The truth is that Matthew may have felt like he and his brother were treated differently, and they may very well have been treated differently because they were totally different kids. They were totally different people, despite being so close in age and raised by the same parents. Joshua was valedictorian and went to Dartmouth, where Matthew really struggled in school, and he did graduate and went to college for hotel and restaurant management, but he dropped out after several weeks and was living with his family on and off. Joshua had a, quote, sunny disposition and many friends, whereas Matthew didn't and was more of like an antisocial type of person. Under Matthew's photo in his yearbook, it said, quote, sometimes you have to lose to win. And under Joshua's, it said, quote, one ought every day at least to hear a little song, read a good poem, see a fine picture if possible, to speak a few reasonable words. So they were different, and it makes sense that there would be a different type of attention that each of them was getting based on them being different types of people, right? But it wasn't just that. Matthew also got in his fair share of trouble, and it wasn't little trouble either. Well, it started as little trouble, obviously, as these things usually do, but then it grew and it grew and it grew. Some people even said that the problems with Matthew started when he was just a kid. Matthew was said to be a quiet and shy kid that just always seemed a little bit off, even reportedly having depression as young as 5 years old. And he was said to just act sort of strange, with one girl saying that her mother told her that when she was just a few weeks old, Matthew, at 2 years old, put a bunch of stones in her mouth, which is them pointing to him being off right from the start. But when I read that, I was like, he was 2. That's like a literal baby. And I have a 2-year-old. And for the record, I don't think a 2-year-old can be intentional. Well, I was going to say it can be intentionally mean, maybe, but I don't think that a 2-year-old would go out of their way to hurt a baby by putting rocks in their mouth. You know what I mean? That 2-year-olds just do weird shit. That I can say for sure. Babies just play, but they did say that with Matthew, he would sometimes get out of hand, with one girl named Tina saying that when he was little, he tried to stab her brother in the stomach with a garden fork. Which again, I don't know if that's a sign or if it's just a kid being weird, because kids are weird, and he might not have known that he was going to, hurt this other kid by doing that, because again, babies. But basically, she said that growing up, everyone around his age was either annoyed by him or scared of him. Another neighbor said that when Matthew was just 4 years old, he was attending a summer recreation program with her kid, and that he had bit and kicked her daughter. And I guess she worked at this summer recreation center at the time he was there, and said that even at such a young age, he was incredibly difficult to handle. She said he was just always picking a fight. And this is something that apparently translated to his home life as well, because he was always trying to fight his brother Joshua. He was picking fights with him, or would hit him or hurt him. And he was said to be physically aggressive with his little brother, and that Joshua was always just trying to defend himself. And his parents reportedly knew about this, but just thought, boys will be boys, and this was a phase, and it was something he would grow out of. They didn't see it as something that was very serious. As he got older and his temperaments, let's say, didn't improve the way they thought it should, they did everything they thought that they should to help with that. They showered him with love. They sent him to a private school so he could get more one-on-one attention from his teachers and things like that. But nothing that they did seemed to work. For example, when he was just 13 years old, the cops actually got called on him at 13 for illegally riding a motorbike in the street. I didn't get the specifics of that, but it seemed harmless enough. But from there, the visits from the police got more frequent, and for things that were more serious. For example, when he got arrested for assaulting a friend at a party, arrested for theft because he stole jewelry from a home where he was dog sitting, and stealing $900 from one of his former employers. He also got questioned about $3,000 that was stolen from a liquor store where he worked, a job that he actually got after being fired from a hotel job he worked for, wait for it, stealing money from them as well. In 1988, the year he graduated, he was arrested for charges on impersonating a cop after he got caught handcuffing somebody who had been like shopping at the mall. And that same year, he faced contempt of court charges. And in early 1989, he had several warrants issued for motor vehicle violations. That same year, he was on a trip to Ecuador with his girlfriend/fiance, depending on the reporting. She's called both. And they had been there for about a month when the two got in a big fight and actually broke up. Like, she broke up with him. And in response, he like flipped out. He took a bunch of pills and he shot himself up with Valium and ended up being put into the hospital because of this. So when he ended up getting released from this hospital and traveled back to the US, right? A trip that he does not remember because he was still so, out of it when it happened. He was picked up by his parents at the airport and they took him to the Overlook Hospital to get more treatment now that he was home. And I guess while he was there, he the nurse tried to put a needle in his arm and he ripped it out of his arm and then took off and left and crashed at a friend's house on the couch for sometime after this happened. I think it was just actually a night, but I could be wrong. Either way, his family's trying to get him help, putting him in the hospital. And he's like, actually, I'm going to rip this out of my arm and I'm going to dip and I'm not going to go to you. I'm going to go to a friend because I don't want your help. Now, speaking of the drugs, I did mention that he used a little bit of drugs while in Ecuador. And this is something that kind of comes up later in the case. He was said to use drugs on and off here and there, but Valium was something he was addicted to. And something about taking the drugs in Ecuador, I don't know if it was drugs that were from Ecuador, so they were different or what, but after that experience, he started to have delusions, reportedly. He started to have delusions about people chasing, drug dealers chasing after him in a Volkswagen minibus. And because of this, he went out and bought a gun. He went out and bought a Beretta pistol from a guy that he met at Ray's Sports Shop, which is, by the way, a transaction that he doesn't even remember happening. Okay, because there's certain things that happen and he doesn't remember them or says he doesn't remember them. So he's tripping out. He thinks people are following him. He buys a gun. And you may notice that I said he bought it from somebody he met at the sports shop. And that's because he went there to try to buy a gun. And they were like, no, you're underage. You can't buy a gun. So he ended up getting this guy, and he bought a gun from this guy. And he told police, by the way, this is so random, but he told police he bought the gun for $50. But it turns out he bought it for $650 and just lied about the price because he was embarrassed about how much he got swindled in a transaction he didn't even remember happening. I realize now in having this little conversation between you and me, specifically you, that I have no concept of the price of guns because both 50 and 650 sound right in my head because I don't know how much guns are. But anyways, moving on. He buys this gun and here's my thoughts. It seems like perhaps this is not the right time for somebody going through all of these mental health issues and drug issues to be purchasing a gun. Just a thought. But moving on, I digressed quite a bit. We were talking about the fact that he tried to take his own life. He escaped from the hospital and, didn't go home. Well, this was not the only or first attempt at him trying to take his own life either. There was another suicide attempt where he had taken a bunch of pills while actually being on the phone with the chief of police. And he was told that he may be dying. So he needed to go out of the house and go talk to the officers who were waiting for him outside. And eventually he finally did and was taken to the Guidelines Crisis Center. And this all happened at about the same time when he bought this gun. So that's what I mean when I'm like, maybe it's not the time for him to be doing such a thing. Especially considering this gun was going to be used in the first very concerning act of violence against Matthew's parents by Matthew, specifically against his father. And this was just 6 months before the murders. So it was September of 1989, and Matthew was said to have been suffering from delusions. So he ends up calling police, actually, the police. Calling police? Sure. He calls the police, and he tells them that somebody is after him. Somebody's tried to kill him. Somebody has slashed the tires on his car. He's freaking out. He's talking to the police about this. While he's on this phone call, his dad comes up to him and is like, hey, what's going on? Who are you talking to? ETC, ETC. And in response, Matthew flips out on his dad and tells him he better shut the fuck up or he's going to put a bullet through his dad's head. He then proceeded to take this gun that he illegally bought, got somebody to, he bought it, right? and he shoots it 13 times into the car. Okay, nobody was hit, but imagine 13 shots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 shots. That would be terrifying. So he was arrested because you just can't go around doing that. At the time he was arrested, he gave police this gun, and this gun was a 25 caliber gun that had the serial number filed off. After this happened, Matt was sent to a psychiatric hospital, and he was there for a while. It was either a couple weeks or 2 months, which is different, but that's what I saw. A couple weeks to 2 months. So he's there for a while. And while in the hospital, against his parents' wishes, he was indicted on the charges of making terrorist threats. This is one of those situations where the police didn't wait for like the person who was a victim to have to file charges. My sentence just went out my brain. But basically, you know how sometimes they're like, oh, we couldn't do anything because the victim didn't want to press charges. Well, this time they were like, we've assessed the situation and charges are going to be brought whether you like it or not. So his parents were reportedly not happy about this. This isn't something they wanted to happen. And they were said to not be super helpful for police, and even like scheduled a vacation at the time they were supposed to be meeting with the grand jury. He was their son, you know, they didn't want him to get in trouble. They didn't want him to go to jail. They wanted to protect him. So they actually ended up hiring him an attorney to try and get the case just dismissed. But the prosecutor at the time was not convinced that that was the right thing to do. His name was Nicholas Bissell, and fun fact, he was the same prosecutor that would later handle the murder trial. And he said that he had Matthew evaluated by a psychiatrist who determined that he had paranoid delusions and had suffered from a, quote, acute psychotic episode. And reportedly, he believed that Matthew would kill one day. But as I'm sure you can imagine, the psychiatrists for the defense disagreed. They said that the prognosis for Matthew was pretty good, and that if he stayed away from drugs and extreme pressure, he should be fine. Now, this was allegedly after he and his parents both told the defense's psychiatrist that everything was fine, that they wanted him home, and that everybody was getting along just perfectly. Now, when it came to this case, he ended up being acquitted of the charges by reason of insanity, which, when I say it out loud, it doesn't sound right, but that's what it said. Basically, he didn't end up going to jail for this. And the judge said that though they did not believe that he was a danger to himself or a danger to society, they still wanted him to be put in a hospital to receive treatment. But his parents told the judge, like, don't worry, we're going to get him outpatient care. His parents were reportedly told, like, you need to follow through with this. You need to make sure to get him help, because if you don't, he may very well kill you one day. And I guess several people told them this, with one officer even saying of this, quote, I think the only people who were shocked about having him kill his parents were his parents. Which obviously that was a statement that was said after the murders were committed. But at the time, his parents, you know, they just loved him and they wanted to protect him. They didn't see it for as bad as it actually was. They didn't think his problems were as serious as clearly they were. So with that, Matthew was released, but with the stipulation that he stay off drugs and alcohol, and submit to alcohol and drug testing and continue counseling at the Carrier Clinic in Montgomery. Now, you may be shocked to hear this, but Matthew did not stick to these stipulations. And this is something that he actually later brought up in his during his murder trial, telling the judge that no one checked on him. Nobody monitored him like they were supposed to. And if they had, he would still have his family, which is quite the thing to say. But both the prosecutor and the judge agreed that the system was not at fault here. But let me know what you think. Do you think that, obviously Matt's at fault, but do you think the system is also at fault for saying that he needed to keep up with these things to make sure that he was mentally sound, and he did not do that and nobody was checking? What are your thoughts on that? Because that is something we see quite often across the board. The people are not monitored as well as they should be. And in Matt's case, he really should have been, because 6 months later, he murdered his parents. Prior to committing these murders, Matthew went to a sports shop and with an either forged or expired like firearms ID card, he bought a 20 gauge pump action shotgun. And he was said to show the shotgun off. He wasn't secretive about buying it, with a friend of his named Steven saying that he came over and showed it to him. And what a dick. He took it and he pointed it at the dog for fun. He didn't shoot the dog, but who does that? But he was just pointing it around for fun. And Steven says he remembers Matthew saying something along the lines of, "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad," while aiming the shotgun at various items. Now, let's move forward to the day of the murders. It's Tuesday, January 29th, 1991, and we are at the Liberty Quarter section of Bernards Township at the home of the Heikkilas. And it was here that Matthew murdered his parents. It is believed that his parents were ambushed and that they had no idea it was coming. They believe that he shot his mother first. As I said, she was found in the hallway near her bedroom, and she had been shot multiple times in the head with the sawed-off 20-gauge shotgun. Next, he killed his father, and he was found at the bottom of a staircase, in the cellar, and they believe that he had been outside and was coming inside because he was wearing a light jacket. It was said to be, and I'm sure you can imagine, one of the most brutal scenes that these officers had ever seen when they arrived, with one cop saying of the murders, quote, "It was a scene I'll never forget. To say it was gruesome is an understatement." So now, I've gone forward a little bit more than I wanted to here. We need to backtrack a little bit and talk about something that happened before the bodies were found. And this part of this particular case is actually how I learned about the whole case. Because I first learned about this case actually on TikTok. So I saw a TikTok about this part of the case and I was like, what the heck? So that's when I started searching about the case, found my friend's YouTube video, watched the YouTube video, was like, oh my God, I have to know everything. Deep dove into it. Now we're talking about it. But this part is just, this whole case is holy crap. But this particular part is holy crap. So after killing his parents, Matthew stole his mother's car so that he could pick up his girlfriend and take her to dinner. Her name was Marta, and she was a college student at the College of St. Elizabeth Convent Station. The two had met while working together in a hotel, and apparently he went to dinner that night to celebrate her birthday. That was the whole situation here. Now keep in mind, this girl has no idea what's going on, has no idea what her boyfriend did prior to picking her up. But he stole his dad's credit cards, he stole his mom's car, he goes, he picks her up, he takes her to New York City, and then takes her to the Windows on the World restaurant, which I guess was a very fancy, popular restaurant on the top of the World Trade Center. So it no longer exists, or at least this location no longer exists. And for a little sidetrack here, I'm going to get off subject, but just for 30 seconds, because I was reading about it when I was reading about this case and I was reading about this restaurant, and it's incredibly sad. But apparently on September 11th, 2001, as we know, reportedly, every person who was dining at this restaurant that day, which there were many because this was a really popular restaurant and they were hosting, regular breakfast patrons and also the Risk Waters Financial Technology Congress, and everyone died. Everyone in that restaurant died the day the towers fell. It's just so fucked up. Because you hear about all these people who died that day, and again, that's not what we're talking about, but when you hear specifics, I don't know, it just got to be. But either way, let's get back to Matthew and Marta eating at this restaurant when it still existed. Now, it was actually kind of surprising to Marta that they were there that day, because in the days leading up to this birthday dinner, they hadn't been on the best, they hadn't been in the best situation with one another. He was being a dick to her, quite honest. She said he was being very brooding and depressed, and he would lock himself in a room, and then he would tell her that he knew she was cheating on him, and then would brag to her about how he was cheating on her and how he had a new girl that he loved, and how he and the new girl he loved were going to run off to Italy. So it just sounds kind of like a bit of a toxic relationship, which makes sense for the type of person who could murder his parents, right? And so they're at this date. They're hanging out. And he's like, okay, here's what we're going to do now that we're done eating. I want you to come back to my house because I have a big surprise for you. which Shyamalan twist. Well, I was going to say there was no surprise, but there was a surprise, but not the good type of surprise. Once they got back to his house, Matthew informed Marta that this would be her last night alive. For her birthday, he wanted to kill her. He showed her what he had done to his mother. He told her that his father was dead as well, and said by morning, she and he would join them. And then he had her read a letter that he wrote where he told her in this letter that he was going to kill her, he was going to kill all her family, and he was going to kill all of her friends. And when you read something like that, after seeing the body of this guy's dead mother in the condition she was in, I can only imagine that she believed him wholeheartedly. Now, Marta had to spend the night in this house with him, and she didn't sleep at all, as I'm sure you can imagine, because in addition to being in this shitty situation, she was also handcuffed to Matthew all night. I even saw one report that said that she was actually handcuffed to Dawn, which I don't believe that's true. From everything else I read, it was Matthew, but one report said this, and I was like, holy fuck, can you even imagine? And she was handcuffed to him all night while they slept. Well, he slept in his brother's room. And it was kind of like sort of asleep, but sort of awake. So he'd sleep for a bit, and then he'd wake up and talk about how he was going to kill them both. And then he'd sleep for a bit. And all the while she's just sitting there like, the fuck do I get out of this situation? But she was able to get out of it in a way, because she was able to convince him that instead of the two dying, instead of a murder-suicide situation here, what they should do instead is run away together. So by morning, he had decided that they would both live, but that they were going to flee the country. Now, Marta, she sounds like a smart girl, because she's like, leaving the country. Yes, amazing. I love that for us. But here's the thing. We got to go to my house so I can get my passport, because I can't leave the country without my passport, right? So they go to her house, and when they get there, she tells her mother what's going on. I don't think she tells her like what's going on, but she tells her like, me and Matt, we're going to leave the country. Cool, right? And her mom's like, yeah, no, you're fucking not. You're in school. That's not happening. So there was a little bit of a pushback, a little bit of arguing with Matt, but in the end, he left without Marta, without getting violent, which is so incredibly lucky considering we know what he is capable of. Now, Marta did not report what happened to her until after the bodies of Richard and Dawn were found, which, to be fair, was only within like hours, right? A day. But she didn't go to police because she was scared, because he had told her that if she had told anybody, if she did anything, he was going to kill her, he was going to kill her family, and he was going to kill her friends. And seeing that he had killed his parents, she believed that this was true. And I just feel so bad for this girl, like for this to all happen. And they had only been dating a couple months. So his girlfriend, traumatized. Richard and Dawn, gone. And immediately police know that he's the one responsible because of the fact that they find the slugs at the scene that literally have mom and dad written on them with felt tip pen. And for the record, later, once he's arrested and all of that, he was questioned about these slugs, and he said yes, he did write the names on the slugs, and that there were actually 2 other slugs that had 2 more names written on them, and that was the names of him and his girlfriend, but that they were just never used. And if you're curious about Joshua, by the way, because at first I was like, oh, they know right away that it's Matt because it says mom and dad, but like they have 2 kids. Well, he was quickly looked into and ruled out and was actually put into protective custody, as was Marta eventually. Now, even though he was on the run on Thursday, January 31st, 1991, Matt was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. They just had to arrest him. So a statewide police alert went out so people could be watching for him so he could be brought in, but they didn't know at this point that he had actually left the country. But they find out pretty quickly, because after Marta saw that his parents' bodies had been found, that he was considered a person of interest in their murders, she speaks to police and she tells police about his intent to do some traveling. This was confirmed very shortly thereafter, because his mother's car, the blue Audi that he wasn't allowed to drive, was found parked at the Newark International Airport. So the car is found. Marta tells them he wants to do some traveling, and they come out with a statement almost immediately where they said that they had a pretty good idea of where he intended to go. Now, I don't know if this is because this is a place he had been before, because we learned that this was a place he had gone before, or if it's because Marta told them exactly where he planned to go. That part wasn't true, but they were on to him pretty quickly. It turns out the place they believed he was, and the place that he was indeed at, was Jamaica. So he was there. He'd gone there to avoid prosecution. And while there, he was having a good old time. He had a good old sob story to tell the locals. He told them that his name was Andy, and his mom and his dad, who, by the way, his dad was a U.S. ambassador to Jamaica, that they had both been murdered in a robbery/burglary in New York. He also told people that he was in the Marines, which was not true, by the way. He wanted to. He always wanted to go to the Marines. He even got like a Marines logo tattooed on like his upper right arm, but he had never actually been able to go due to his criminal record. They were like, no, we don't actually want you, but thanks. Cool, you got that tattoo. That's a little weird because you're not one of us, but you do you, but not with us. But the point is, telling the people there that he was in the Marines and that his parents were killed, it was a good story. It was a good sob story. It made it so he made a lot of friends, and he had a lot of people to talk with, and to socialize with. So he had a good time, all while funding this lovely trip with his father's stolen credit cards, which made it easy for police to track him. But, it did take some time. So for 5 days, he got to have a vacation. I'm sure it was a stressful vacation considering the circumstances, but a vacation nonetheless. He got to relax. I mean, physically, maybe not mentally. He got to hang out at the beach. He got to swim. He got to ride bikes and talk to people. He got to have a good time before inevitably being arrested and, spending quite some time in jail. But of course, the vacation had to end. He no longer could relax, take it slow, and let the good times roll because a U.S. cop got to Jamaica. Basically, this U.S. cop, his name was Burkery, I think. I don't know how to pronounce his name. It's Burcarey, I think. He gets there and he waits at the station in Jamaica while a Jamaican police officer goes and arrests Matt because he recognized him from a prior run-in because he had been here before. So he goes, he sees Matt, he's hanging there chilling, not killing, in a tank top and a Marine's hat because, you got to stick to the character that you have created. And he arrests him. He brings him back to the station, and Matt sees the cop, recognizes him, and is shocked to see that he had come all this way to Jamaica. But he had, and he let Matt know that he was arrested for 2 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of his parents. He surrendered without resisting, and he was found with his father's checkbook and a New Jersey firearms identification card. And inside his hotel room, they found a little bit of weed, a portable phone that they believe was taken from his mother's Audi, and also, obviously, some Jamaican currency. Once arrested, Matthew was questioned about his parents' murder by the Jamaican authorities, and during this questioning, his story changed a lot. Like, 1 second, he'd say he didn't remember anything, and the next second, he was giving you, like, exact details down to the second, is what I was trying to say. But my brain decided not to work and to malfunction a smidge. It was glitching, like things do sometimes, because I am not a human. One of us. Anyways, that went somewhere that it didn't need to go, but Matt, was read his rights. And he actually agreed to go back to the U.S. with the officer instead of having to go through the whole extradition process, which can take some time, right? We've seen that before, especially in the Haley Anderson case. I mean, it never happened there. It would have happened here. But anyway, he agrees to go back. And he is not only facing the first-degree murder charges, which we've already discussed, he was also facing kidnapping charges for taking Marta, because at this time, they had talked to Marta. So he's facing the charges of kidnapping her and taking her to his parents' house and forcing her to stay in the house with the bodies. After being arrested, he had several requests that were interesting. Some that were kind of normal, which is like talking to his brother at Dartmouth, talking to Marta, which they were like, she don't want to talk to you, motherfucker, but you can ask and we will say no. I'm pretty sure they said no. But he also had some strange requests, like wanting a newspaper clipping about his parents' murders to help him better understand what happened. Thought that was odd. He also, that's probably the only really odd one, which just feels a little souvenir-y, or no, not souvenir-y, trophy. There's a difference between a souvenir and a trophy. I learned this recently. One is one that you like keep for yourself, and one is one that you give somebody around you so you can see them wearing it, like display it. I can't remember which is which. Either way, that. He also wanted the pamphlets from his parents' funerals, and what he wanted most of all was to be taken to their graves. Now, during this time when he was first arrested, he at least tried to act like he felt bad. I don't know if he really did, but he seemed like he did. He acted like he did. He did a phone interview where he said he felt absolutely terrible and said he just wanted to talk to his parents. He said that he thought about calling his mother and realized that he couldn't, and that's when his emotions and his mind just ran absolutely wild. He said of this, of coming to the realization that he couldn't talk to his parents, he couldn't call his mother because he had murdered them. And I quote, "I remember what happened, but I can't believe I did it. It was a very different person. Anyone that knows me knows I am not of a violent nature. There's nothing violent in my past." Which a lot of people did say differently. And I think shooting a gun 13 times into a car after threatening to shoot your dad in the head is violent, personally. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, Matthew was not the only person who found these murders to be horrifying. All the people in this local area, like this small area, were mortified to hear what happened. This happened in a very small town where, as cliche as it sounds, people didn't lock their doors. So when they see all the flashing lights and the crime scene tape, it was all anyone could talk about. Like, if you were in that town, you knew. And if you didn't know and you were out in public and you were like, I don't know, going in to buy a pack of cigarettes or whatever, a pack of gum, whatever you buy, Skittles, they would just be like, oh, yeah, your total is 69 cents. And did you hear? Cops were walking around and questioning people as flocks of neighbors came up to the barricades to just see what was going on. And once they found out what was going on and they learned who did it, they were shocked. It was all that people could think about. It was all people could talk about, particularly young people who were Matt's age, because they knew him. And they sat there and they talked about the two brothers, especially Matt, because he's the person who was arrested for doing this. Everyone was just worried. The kids were worried. The parents were worried. And it just changed the area forever. And now, everyone locked their doors, which is something that everyone should always be doing because nobody can be trusted. And I can only imagine how hard that would be and how scary that would be because, yeah, you could lock your door. But this was a kid who killed his parents. They weren't trying to lock him out. You know what I mean? And people knew that Dawn and Richard were having trouble with Matt, of course. There didn't seem to be anyone who didn't know that they were worried about him and they were struggling with him. Dawn was pretty open and talking with friends and coworkers, though not really extended family, but friends and coworkers about the problems they were having. And even on the day she was murdered, she had started writing a letter to Josh where she was telling him all about how much trouble she was just having with Matt. But in this letter, she also wrote that she loved both of the boys so much. And this letter was found by Matt, by the way, and that's one of the many possible motives for the murders that police and police believe was a motive for the murders. That sentence went off the rail, but he found this letter that day, and he says that though she had written about loving both boys, when he read the letter, he interpreted it more as her saying that she loved Joshua more than she loved him because Joshua was her natural son. But for those who knew the family, they said that this couldn't be farther from the truth. Friends of the parents said that they loved Matthew. They loved him so much they would give their lives for him, especially his mom. Her friend Susan said that she loved him so much. There was no way that she could have known that the kid that she loved with all her heart was capable of doing something like this to her. And she said specifically of this, and I quote, "As your kids are growing, you get a little bump and set it aside. You tend to deal with each little bump and don't realize a mountain has grown. I don't think any of us ever thought it would end the way it did." And it's just so sad. It's so sad that it ended this way because they really did everything that they felt like they needed to do. They didn't let him go to jail, which I feel like a lot of parents would do the same thing if they were in that situation. Maybe not everybody. You can let me know if you're a parent what you would do. Would you let your kid go to jail or would you try to help him? Because they went the route of trying to help him. They even put him in the carrier clinic more than once to try to get him the help that he needed. And in case you don't know, because I didn't, the carrier clinic is the largest nonprofit behavioral health hospital in New Jersey. But, clearly it wasn't enough. And that's what people didn't understand is like, why wasn't it enough? Why would he go and do something like this? The prosecutor later said of this, and I quote, "It's a case where there's a certain irony that they ignored all these warnings and they ultimately suffered the fate people had predicted." Now, as far as motives, police initially believed that the reason that Matt had killed his parents is because they had found a suicide note that he had written. Basically, in the note, he wrote about how he wanted to kill himself and how he wanted to kill Marta. And in this note, he wrote that he wanted her to die and that once she died, he could not go on. And they believed that this sparked these murders because his parents had found it. It had actually been ripped up and had been taped back together, reconstituted, I'm assuming taped back together, and was actually found with Dawn's belongings. So we know that they did find this note. If you ask Matt, though, there are different reasons why he did this. He said that the note thing wasn't true, that he saw it being reported in the media, but that's why he did what he did, but that it wasn't true, that it didn't spark it, that nothing sparked it. But police also believed once they went away from this note theory, they started to say that they believed it's because he didn't think his parents loved him as much as they loved Josh. And that's because this is what he told Marta, and then Marta told police. But again, according to everybody who knew them, this wasn't actually true, but this could have just been how he felt. And a friend of the family's, I've mentioned her a few times, her name was Susan. She said something pretty insightful, actually, something that I found to be pretty insightful about why Matt may have felt this way. She said, quote, "I don't think Matthew ever liked himself enough to believe that anyone else could love him. The greatest tragedy is that she loved him too much." And that was referring to his mother. Now, though people went through all the different motives of what the reasoning was, what they believed the reasoning was, right? Because Matt's saying there was no reason. The prosecution had a pretty straightforward motive that they were trying to present, which I don't know if I necessarily agree with this being the motive. This could have been part of it. This could have been all of it. I don't know. It just seems too surface level to do something so horrible, but that could just be me trying to make something more of it because it's so unbelievable that somebody could do something like this. It would have to be something profound. But the police think that he killed his parents just because he wanted to take his girlfriend to dinner. He wanted to use the Audi and he wasn't able to. So he killed them so he could take the car and so that he could use his parents' money to take her on this date. Which, is that it? I don't know. His motive has never been clarified because of the fact that he gave so many differing reasons, especially in the letters, which, boy, the Matthew Heikkila letters. If you know, you know. And I can't get into every single one because literally I could have a podcast specifically just on this case because there is so much in the letters. So I can't read all of them, but I will read you some excerpts from some of them because boy, oh boy, did he have some things to say. He wrote of his motives, one being that he really wanted to kill Marta, but didn't want his parents to find out, so he killed them. He said he didn't have the courage to even do the murders, so he prayed to the devil, staying awake for days. And he said he was given the strength to commit the murders by the devil. He also said that he did in fact kill his parents for the money and the car, adding that he knew his mother loved him because she told him right before he, quote, put the slug right through her head. This is what he wrote. He wrote that he still planned to kill Marta, to kill her family, to kill the prosecutor, and to kill the jury, depending on how the verdict went. He wrote in detail about the murders and said that he was not afraid to die. He wasn't afraid of the death penalty, and that he knew he wasn't going to get the death penalty anyway because he was going to get off due to insanity. Now, he said this because I didn't mention it yet, but the prosecutor was going after the death penalty. And if Matthew was given the death penalty, he would be the first person to have received it since New Jersey reinstated it. I can't remember when they reinstated it, but nobody had been put to death since then, and he would be the first. But back to the letters, because I digressed a little bit there. After he was arrested, he started writing letters to so many people. He wrote them to his brother. He wrote them to Marta. He wrote them to a bunch of members of the media, to the chief of police, so many different people that I can't even remember off the top of my head. Oh, and his ex-girlfriend, Melanie. And speaking of his ex-girlfriend, Melanie, this poor girl, she was dating him right before all of this happened. Found out that she was pregnant by him. Tells him about it. He's ecstatic. He's so stoked. He always wanted a biological child, he said, because, he felt something was missing because he had been adopted. So he really wanted to be a father and have a child that came from his seed, essentially, right? So she tells him this. He's stoked. But she's not sure what she wants to do because she's young. And she's like, I don't know what I want to do. Do I want to keep it? Do I want to put it up for adoption? Do I want to abort it? Like, what is the vibe here that I want to do? And while she's stressing out about these options, he comes to her and he dumps her. He dumps her, saying that he had banged Marta and wanted to be with her. So they break up. Okay. And then one day in January, he comes back to her. He comes to her house with a gun, with the shotgun, and tells her he wants to get back together. He holds the shotgun to her head and tells her they should get back together. Now, she's brave because she says no. And luckily, he didn't kill her. It was after that encounter with the shotgun, that she decided what she was going to do about the pregnancy. She was going to have an abortion. She did not want to give birth to a child with that. And she actually ended up having this abortion the day that he was arrested in Jamaica. Can you imagine being this girl, to have all of that happen, and then to have to testify about this, about your abortion at trial, which had to just be so traumatizing. But it was the defense's defense that Matt was suffering from adopted child syndrome, which is something we're going to get into more when we talk about the trial, and basically said that her, Melanie, having this abortion was like the ultimate rejection to Matt. But I wonder why this even mattered, considering that the abortion didn't happen till after he was arrested. So why was it relevant? It just seemed like the type of thing that he did to punish her. And I could be wrong, but that's what it feels like, because it's not like it helps his case. It just, in my opinion, seemed like he wanted to punish his ex. And it seemed like something that he enjoyed doing, from, showing up at her house with a shotgun and threatening her life, to making his defense team have her relive something that had to be very traumatizing. And then we know what he did to Marta. We know what he did to her before he was arrested. And we know how he threatened her and how he threatened her family. And this is something, by the way, that she testified to that was very, very powerful. But that wasn't all he did, because he continued to harass her in these letters, to harass Marta in these letters. So he wrote several to her, but let me give you some excerpts from a few of them. To Marta, he wrote, quote, "You don't have much time to live, honey. My friends are going to suck all the life out of you, which probably isn't much. They're going to make sure you die slow and painfully. If I get out, I'll find you. And if you're not dead yet, I'll personally make sure that you die. And honey buddy, you don't want to know how that is. I never loved you. I loved my parents very much, if love exists, which is why I think it does. But you, I never loved you." He added, quote, "On your birthday, I killed my parents in cold blood with plans on killing you next. But when I hit you and I saw the look of terror in your eyes, similar to the look of that of my father before I shot his head off, and my mother, I couldn't shoot you for a couple reasons. 1, too loud. And 2, too bloody. I was gonna beat you to death or strangle you. That's what the ties were there for. Love always for forever. Matthew." Can you imagine receiving those letters from a person who's in jail who you know is perfectly capable of actually going through on those threats? It's horrifying. And it seems that he truly meant this, that he truly felt this way, and he really wanted her dead, because he mentioned killing Marta in letters to his brother also. In a letter to his brother, he wrote, quote, "I don't know how to say I'm sorry. They were always talking about how great you were, how much they loved you, so I killed them. I'm sorry for jeopardizing your future, but I'll be locked up the rest of my life, so you have nothing to worry about. But if I get a chance, I'm gonna kill Marta and her family. Please write to me. Your brother, Matt." Then, in a letter to Fox News, he wrote of Marta, and I quote, "I guess the reason I did not kill her was because I did not have any shells left. I would have shot her in the stomach so I could watch her die a slow and painful death. She deserved it." I don't know what he thinks she did to him, but what the hell, man? Like, he needs to fucking chill. But he has no chill, as we know here. Now, this guy literally sent out over 200 letters while he was in jail. And if you're like me, you might be like, how the fuck was he able to send out these types of letters with like threats like this? I don't know. I feel like you're not able to do that because I know when it comes to these letters, his were supposed to be going through the prosecutor's office so that they could like monitor them, which you would think, I thought all prisoners' letters were monitored, but apparently not, because how Matt got away with doing this is he would give his letters to other prisoners or to friends who visited him in jail and have them mail out his letters. To which whoever's mailed out Matt's letters when he was saying shit like this, you're a dick too. You know who you are if you're watching this, and you suck. That's not cool at all. Oh, and just before I forget, because I don't know, I just wanted to mention it. It's not like totally relevant, but in one of these letters, he also mentioned like how he was able to get his parents home that day because they were supposed to be at work. And he said he lured them home, that he actually lured them. Now, I don't know if this is true because Matt does lie quite a bit and changes his story quite a bit. But in a letter he wrote that what he did is he contacted his parents and told them that he needed them to come home because one of his girlfriends was pregnant and he needed to talk to them. So this would have been either Melanie or Marta, and Melanie was the one that was pregnant. So he was probably talking about Melanie, but neither of them were there that day. So it would have been a lie to lure them. But again, whole lies a lot. I don't know if he really did lure them or what, but he killed them. That we do know. So let's move on to the trial. When Matthew was arrested, he stayed in jail the whole time, probably because the only people on earth who would have bailed him out, he murdered. And his bail was pretty high. It was set at $2.5 million. Initially, it was set at $1 million, and then it was raised to $2.5 million. And of course, the prosecution thought he shouldn't get any bail because he's a flight risk. I mean, he literally went to Jamaica and was talking about running off and taking Marta and going and fleeing the country. But still, here we were with them giving him bail. And luckily, though, he couldn't afford to pay it. Now, after his arraignment, several attorneys were asked to take his case, and they all were like, no, I'm good on that. And several people turned him down. And eventually he ended up getting 2 attorneys that were scheduled, hired. He had 2 attorneys from the public defender's office. I can't think of the word I was trying to say there. And one was going to be representing him at the trial, and one was going to be representing him during the penalty phase. At his trial in December of 1992, his attorney did not say that he was innocent of the murders. He did not say that he did not commit the murders. Basically, their argument was going to be that he was not sane at the time he committed the murders. That was the question. Was he sane or was he not? With the defense saying, no, of course he wasn't sane at all. And the prosecution saying that, yes, he was indeed sane when he murdered his parents. The prosecutor said they had plenty of evidence to prove he was sane at the time he committed the murders, and that instead of being insane, he was just a troubled youths. During the trial, the prosecution admitted all the evidence they had that proved that Matt was the one who committed these murders and that he was lucid and with it at the time he did it. Some of the evidence the prosecution entered was the statements taken from Matthew in Jamaica, a videotape of the crime scene, the shotgun used in the killing, which Matthew admitted to buying with a forged permit at the sporting goods store, and the letters Matthew had been writing. The 2 shotgun shells that police found at the crime scene, both which were manually hollowed out, which I didn't even know was a thing, and they were labeled. One said mom and one said mom and dad. And he admitted that he wrote on these slugs before he used them to kill his parents. And the prosecution told the court this. Pretty strong evidence. But the defense, they were saying no, that Matthew suffered from a mental illness, disease, or defect. So at the time he committed the murders, he did not know that it was illegal. But they had a real uphill battle here because even though they told him, stop writing letters, bro. He wrote so many letters to so many people and gave so much information that he now couldn't go back and say that this wasn't true because he'd already said it, right? And these letters, man, they really came back to bite him. But, the defense chugged along as best they could, and they actually used Matt's prior, arrest for the terrorist threats against his father as evidence of his deteriorating mental condition. Basically, they were like, listen, they determined there that he had mental health issues and that he was supposed to get help. And he didn't receive proper care after he was acquitted. And they basically said, well, they did say, quote, they didn't treat him when they should have. They didn't commit him when they should have. And because of that, we have a recurrence. His attorney said that just the prosecution's theory about the motive was enough to prove that Matt was not in the right mind when he committed the murders, because he was like, listen, who in their right mind would murder their parents just to get some money and a car to take their girlfriend on a dinner date? Which I gotta say is a pretty good argument, but that is what the prosecution was saying was his reasoning for doing this, which I don't think is the best argument if I'm honest, but I know they can get him like with more, I think it's aggravating factors if he was like committing robbery at the time he was committing murders, or if he committed the murders to commit the robbery. So I know why they did it. I don't think it's the strongest motive. And I think it sounds kind of like, I don't know. That's just my opinion. Let me know what you think. But they were like, listen, this is why he did it. He was sane when he did it. And in closing, they even quoted one of the letters that Matt had written where he talked about how he was going to beat the charges the same way he had beat the other charges, which just sounds very calculated. Ultimately, the judge on the murder case, who, by the way, was the same judge who handled the last case of the terrorist threats, okay? Same judge both times. Well, this time the judge determined that Matthew was sane at the time the murders were committed. Now, I can only imagine that the jury hearing that he was sane at the time he committed the murders, that like the testimony from the doctors and also the video walkthrough of the house had to be very, very impactful when it came to them determining whether or not he was guilty. The video walkthrough was described as surreal. It was like a home movie of you touring like a normal home, right? There's dishes in the sink, decorations up on the walls from holidays, trophies on the wall, but then you see 2 dead bodies. And in addition to the video, there were also photos of the bodies shown, which the defense tried to keep out of the trial because of how graphic they were, but they weren't able. One of Dawn was said to just be the top portion of her body. This is really, really graphic, but there was only 1/3 of her head left and then a puddle of blood. And the jury saw that. I could not be on a jury for a murder trial, like, because I've seen crime scene photos and I don't like to see them. And 1/3 of her head. So to hear that, and then to hear all the things throughout the trial and hear the defense try to defend this guy for doing what he did. And they even tried to sort of blame the victim, which is something that is really gross. And the prosecutor even like noted this and called it out when they said, quote, they did really everything they could for Matthew. It wasn't a lack of love and it wasn't a lack of trying. It's not their fault. With that, on December 4th, 1992, the jury was sent to deliberate. And after just 3 hours and 45 minutes, they returned with their verdict. Matthew had been charged with a total of 12 charges, and he was found guilty on every single charge. So now it was up to the jury to decide if they believed he should be getting life in prison or the death penalty. When the verdict was read, Matt just sat there quietly. There were people who were there for him. I don't know who these people were, friends, because his family wasn't there. The family didn't attend the trial. But there were people behind him who cried and who like visibly were very upset to find that he was going to be going to prison or he was going to be dying. It was just a matter of what the jury said. And the jury really did have a job. You know, they really did have a hard job in this case. I can't imagine working this case and seeing all the evidence, but they said that it just seemed very clear. And they said it was especially the letters. The letters really did him in because they were able to really show his mindset and show that he was guilty and that he was sane at the time he committed the murders. So at this point, it was the penalty phase. And it's now that we're going to discuss what I've mentioned a couple of times, the thing that was going to be the defense's big mitigating factor when it came to his sentencing. And that was adopted child syndrome, or ACS, which I will try to refer to it as throughout the rest of this video, because the adopted child syndrome, see, it gets really fucky in my mouth. I'm going to be honest. A lot of things do, you guys know, but this one in particular. Oh, and fun fact for you, mid-end video fun fact, is the judge handling this case was the first judge in New Jersey to allow testimony about AS. See, this isn't going to help either. ACS. So I thought that was interesting. And now you know, because I know. The defense brought in a Dr. David Kirshner to testify on Matthew's behalf. And by the way, he is the doctor who coined the phrase adopted child syndrome in the first place. And basically what he says is that adoption is the root of the problem for most children who are adopted and brought to therapy for reasons other than their adoption. Basically, ACS ACS describes an adopted child as having feelings of not belonging and a lack of identity. It's said to cause a child's fragmented sense of identity being partially connected to their birth parents and partially connected to their adopted parents. They also have a feeling of rejection from family and friends because they are adopted. And reportedly, the feeling of rejection can unleash, quote, primal rage. And basically, this primal rage is directed internally towards the natural mother. But since the natural mother isn't there to express the rage at, it ends up being manifested towards the adopted parents. And this doctor said that Matthew's feeling of rejection is what caused him to kill. Now, the prosecution, they called bullshit on this. They didn't buy this defense at all, based on the fact that adopted child syndrome is not in the diagnostic and statistical manual. It wasn't at that time. I wonder if it is now. I did not actually check. Probably should have, but I didn't. So you let me know if you know. I checked into a lot of things. This video is pretty long, but I didn't check into that. But it wasn't at the time. But anyways, even though it wasn't in the book, it is something that wasn't like a new idea. It's something that had been observed or been studied in patients back to the 1950s. And a lot of kids who suffer from this have like similar symptoms. Things like pathological lying, stealing, setting fires, running away, things like that. So that's what this doctor was saying, that basically Matt suffered from this condition that many kids dating back to the 50s suffer from, and that's why he went on to do what he did. He seemed like the type of doctor who really wanted to like advocate for this cause. Like he testified in several different trials to this, this sort of situation, and basically just said that he wanted to do what he could to bring awareness to this because he felt like it could be avoided if these kids received therapy, were actually able to openly talk about being adopted because they feel suppressed and that they can't talk about how they feel about it, so that it manifests in other ways, essentially. Now, when it comes to Matt, yes, he was adopted and he knew he was adopted. He had tried to reach out to his biological mother when he was around the age of 8. He started wanting to look for her, but I guess during the adoption, she gave a fake name, so he wasn't able to locate her. So when it came to the murders, the rage was directed at his adopted parents, right? That's the theory, that the rage was directed at his adopted parents because it was a sort of self-defense for him. He said it was thought that he was preemptively striking out at his parents because he thought they were going to kick him out. Apparently, he had signed a family contract, which was a therapist's suggestion, in which he would be expected to work, save money, attend church, quit smoking, and quit stealing. And if he could not do this, he would be kicked out of the house. He would have to move out. And him being kicked out of the house was seen as like the trigger, or his thought that he would be kicked out of the house was seen as the trigger for this, because it would be the ultimate rejection for him, for the people who adopted him, who he already felt unconnected to, for them to just be like, okay, then you're on your own. Now, after the jury heard all the testimony about the ACS, the next thing that was up on the table, plate spinning in the air. I don't think that's the right words or the right phrase here. Basically, the next thing was whether or not Matt was going to testify on his own behalf. And he actually listened to his attorneys this time. He didn't listen when it came to those letters, which could have been helpful for him. But when it came to this, he listened and he chose not to testify. Now, people were very torn on how they felt about Matt and him receiving the death penalty. It was definitely a divisive topic. And I saw an article in the newspaper where it was so weird that they did, I don't know if they still do things like this. Newspapers aren't really that in anymore, but where they polled a bunch of people to see how they felt on whether he should receive the death penalty or not. And during that poll, it was completely split. Like, people were feeling strongly one way or the other. After 5 hours of deliberation, though, the jury came back and they had not been able to come to a unanimous decision on whether or not Matt should receive the death penalty. They believed that Matt had a history of mental health problems, emotional problems, and that he had a history to prove it. One juror said specifically of this quote, "Personally, I don't think he fully understands why he did it, but I think it was a combination of factors, things that snowballed to a point that he couldn't handle it anymore." Now, apparently, we just had the 10-year anniversary of the apparently kid, by the way. Thank you to a subscriber for sending me that information. But apparently, when he learned that he was not going to be put to death, because basically, since it wasn't unanimous, he wasn't going to be put to death, he had no reaction. But once he got back to jail, he had a smile that was, quote, "so big it could have cracked his face." So now, instead of death, he faced 30 years to life for each of the murders, along with additional time for kidnapping, robbery, terrorist threats, and weapons charges. So the minimum he could get here would be 60 years. Now, Matt, he's obviously very happy with this outcome, though he did say that he planned to appeal right away. And the people who loved him were also very happy with this. There was a minister who'd been seeing him ever since he had been arrested. And this minister said that he was very happy and he felt like the jury made the right choice. In February of 1993, Matthew was sentenced for his crimes. The judge called Matthew, quote, a danger to others, especially those who loved and befriended you, end quote, adding that he believed if Matthew was ever able to return to society, he'd kill again. And he subsequently sentenced Matt to 2 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole for 60 years, which means he will be in prison until he is at least 80 years old to punish him for the, quote, cold, calculated, and premeditated murders committed less than 1 hour apart of the 2 persons who gave you more love than anyone else on this earth. That was a quote directly from the judge. Even though the defense asked for concurrent sentences, which would have meant that they ran at the same time, so he'd have the possibility of parole after 30 years. The judge said no, that 60 years was the absolute minimum that Matt should get for these crimes, and this is something that his defense attorney called an outrage. But the judge disagreed, telling Matt specifically of the murder, and I quote, they wanted you to cease acting like a spoiled child, to stop mooching off their hard-earned money, and to start standing on your own 2 feet as an adult. You showed your appreciation by murdering them. With that, the now 22-year-old Matt was sent to start serving his sentence, less the 753 days that he got for time served. Now, he has spoken out a bit. He's spoken out since he was arrested, and he says he doesn't know why he murdered his parents, but that they are his parents, and that he's so sorry that he did what he did, but that he doesn't believe he was sane at the time that he did it. I know since being in jail, he's found his biological family and he's actually changed his name. And I read that he's in a prison program where he gets to work with dogs or train dogs, something like that, which is always a weird thing with these cases, especially since I read a report that he did perhaps hurt animals in his youth. So that is something. That's something. Now, Matt's family, they're not really into him. They're not picking up what he's putting down anymore. I think he has some extended family who does speak to him from time to time, something like that. But his main family, like his brother, for example, wants nothing to do with him. I guess his grandparents too were like, nah, dog, it's going to be a no from me, because his paternal grandparents, his adopted paternal grandparents, were never able to get over this, right? Not able to get over the fact that he had murdered their child, for one. And for 2, I guess his grandmother, her blood pressure never went back down. After this happened, she never got better. And she eventually died as a result of this, with his grandfather saying of this, quote, Matthew has claimed another victim. It's just really sad, because though it does really seem like he was struggling, I'm not going to say that he wasn't struggling at all. It just seems like he had the support system. You know what I mean? He had these people who would have done anything and everything for him to try to help him and loved him. They wanted what was best for him and they tried. They just didn't know how bad off he really was. Because, man, those who knew them and police both agree that if Dawn and Richard had any fault as parents, is that they loved their son too much. And with that, my friends, is the story of the murders of Dawn and Richard Heikkila. I hope that you found my telling to be informative. I hope I gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering Dawn and Richard with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. What do you believe was Matt's motive for murdering his parents? Do you believe it was one of the several motives that he gave about, the money, or about wanting to kill himself and his girlfriend? Or do you think it did have to do with the adopted child syndrome? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, because it was very divisive then, and I feel like it could be very divisive now, and I'm curious to hear what you have to say. Before you leave, please don't forget to let me know down below what case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases. Whenever you leave me a suggestion, I put it on my list with your name next to it, so if I do cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest because they're often cases I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage. And I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste. Otherwise, you would not be here. Before you leave, if you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. And now with all that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video.